Hello, everybody. It's me, V, White Zulu, and welcome to another piece from my autobiography of the same name. Now, as you recall, I've been sent to St. Anne's College, aged 12, having had nothing but a term at the Notting Road Government School and a term at the St. Anne's Prep as any education at all, or any kind of civilization for that matter. And this is chapter 37. Now, somewhere down the line, I got confused and I skipped a few chapters, but my very good engineer, IT guy, Sean, sorted it out. So they're not missing. It's just that I put the wrong chapter number in and we took it from there. So this is chapter 37, the college, science, and the sanatorium. We had science lessons in a wonderful dungeon-like science room, which had exciting little Bunsen burners at taps at each desk. On the walls were skeletons of various animals and huge jars containing the pickled remains of various creatures, including some human fetuses. One afternoon, after the pickled things had become so cloudy that one could barely see them, the science mistress instructed us to pour out all the formalin and put a fresh lot in from some drums she had ordered. Without gloves or masks and entombed in the basement classroom, we did as we were instructed. It was quite a pleasant task, as it didn't involve taking down copious notes from the blackboard. So I thought nothing of it other than feeling it a bit odd afterwards. That evening, we had fish in white sauce for supper, one of the very few dishes that I could bring myself to eat, and had 2 helpings as I was so hungry. At about 2 the following morning, I was suddenly and copiously sick. I hadn't time to run to the upstairs loo, forbidden to us anyway. So I was sick on the wooden slatted floor and again, until all I could heave up was bile. Somebody called the house matron, who glared at me and told me to clean up the mess, handing me a mop, some disinfectant, and a bucket. Once I'd sort of managed to clear up the worst of it, I'd never seen a mop before in my life other than in the hands of our Zulu maids. I sank back dizzily onto my bed and stayed there till dawn, when the rising bell rang. I continued to lie still, my stomach heaving, until the matron came to inspect the dorm for tidiness and found me still lying there. "If you're sick, you belong in the San, not here," she snapped at me. And I dragged my weak, aching body off the bed and all the way to the San. The grim-faced sister, reminiscent of Nurse Ratched from that movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, looked at me and said nothing, but took me to a chilly-looking single-bed ward, told me to undress and put on a San nightie. "I'll get someone to bring your things down," she told me coldly, and left. Nausea came over me again, just as suddenly as it had during the night, and as I couldn't find a receptacle to be sick in, nor could I find the bathrooms, as she hadn't shown me where they were, threw up on the floor again. Sister was furious. Who do you think that is going to clean up that mess? She shrieked at me. Don't you dare think it's going to be me, because I don't do that sort of thing. So once again, I was handed a mop and a bucket and groggily tried to clean it up. I could barely stand by now, ill, dehydrated from some sort of poisoning, and exhausted from the long walk from Macrory to the San. I felt half dead. When I was finally allowed back into bed, I fell into a delirious sort of half sleep, only to be woken by a sister who stuck a half glass of water and a bitter tasting pill at me. I drank the water greedily, thirsty from dehydration, and managed to keep it all down. I was kept in the sanatorium for 3 days. I was only allowed a plastic mug of unsweetened black tea and 2 Maori biscuits, flat, dry, cardboard-like things, 3 times a day. And my strength didn't bounce back. I was given a tiny portion of poached white fish in parsley sauce on my 3rd and last evening, and half starved, I wolfed it down. It stayed down, and I was released back to the hurly-burly of school life. During my 3 days in the San, I'd been allowed to pick a couple of books from the small library there, a few bookshelves of novels to read while I languished in bed. This brought my dream of being left alone to read true, and I found it an unexpectedly pleasant surprise, in spite of all the physical misery I was going through. I was still weak and dizzy from my mystery illness, or more likely poisoning, and had lost ill-afforded weight on the austere diet. I never discovered whether it was the formalin or the fish, but none of the other girls became ill that night, just me, possibly because my resistance was down due to my already fragile state of health. I had to catch up with the others, get my missed work from Mary, and generally cope with day-to-day life in the fast lane. Now, at the disadvantage of feeling weaker and having even less energy. I had never learned how to learn. Since I'd had such poor grounding, I didn't know how to revise or take notes, as the other girls seemed to be doing. The method of teaching was for our teachers to write copious notes on the blackboard out of our textbooks, and we'd copy them down in class. Or they would dictate out of our textbooks reams and reams of work, which we had to write into jotters with pencils, and then copy them neatly into our notebooks for homework in fountain pen. Sometimes the teachers passed out Roneoed, a 1950s type of copy machine, sheets with sections of our textbooks copied onto them, or they just told us to copy out pages and pages from our textbooks. Even the drawings in the case of geography and biology. I laboriously copied out everything, and then, when told to revise part of it for the test the following day, I didn't really know what the word meant, so I'd sit and stare at the work, none the wiser. In class, if we weren't taking notes, I would sit and daydream, tuning out the teacher's droning voice and gaze out at the school grounds, where I could see a Zulu gardener pushing a lawnmower over the kikuyu grass next to the San. Oh, how I envied him with his freedom. There he got to be out in the glorious sunshine, with the scent of flowering jasmine in the air and that delicious smell of freshly cut green grass, while I was trapped, cooped up in the cold classroom, with nothing to do except wait for the bell to ring and release me to go to yet another boring lesson or lunch. Ironically, given the chance, I would have gladly changed places with this gardener, and, unbeknown to me, he would have done the same rather than face what was left of his life doing manual labor. Lunch went like this. Mondays, beef stew and boiled potatoes with stewed pumpkin. The meat was sour and so overcooked it had become grey string held together by gristle. It had also stuck to the bottom of the pot and got burnt, so had a bitter taste. The vegetables had also been boiled for so long that they had become string and yellow water. Pudding was tapioca pudding, frog spawn as we called it. Tuesdays was cottage pie, minced from the leftover stew, and had exactly the same sour taste. The potato topping had developed a mysterious pool of yellowish transparent grease floating on the top. The same vegetables and pudding. Oh, the same vegetables. And pudding was dead dog, a long stodgy pastry rolled up with jam oozing out of the sides and lumpy, tasteless custard. Wednesdays was the best. Sausages, although they'd been baked in an oven for so long that they were merely tough, hard, mahogany-coloured skin with the tiniest amount of edible sausage inside. These at least came with mashed potatoes, just mashed. There was no seasoning, no milk or butter to make it palatable, and a forkful of them was like taking a mouthful of wallpaper glue. Pudding was mud and toenails, a tasteless, glutinous, dark brown coloured blancmange covered in grated coconut. Thursday was that sour, scorched beef stew again, or sometimes meatballs, which the girls said with glee had been rolled under William, the Zulu head cook's sweaty armpits. These were accompanied by rice, just like at the prep, or plain boiled potatoes, and the same old veggies, inevitably boiled to buggery, as Mum sometimes called Masangu's veg, when he was having an off day and concentrating on his fat, rolled-up spliff than his cooking. With that came a pudding called syrup mattress, a large square of sponge cake baked in a tin, turned out, and which had a minuscule amount of golden syrup poured all over it. Fridays was fish, deep fried in an extremely greasy, ill-drained batter, and soggy chips with a slice of lemon. Pudding would be frog spawn again, or one of the others. Saturdays we had steak and kidney pies, bought in from a Pietermaritzburg bakery, which were quite nice and were accompanied by salads of grated carrots, beetroot, which I hate, tomato and lettuce. Pudding was a permutation of the ones I've mentioned. Sundays we got roast beef, flat, hard, stringy grey meat like we'd had at the prep. the same leathery, anemic roast potatoes, and watery, stringy, pale grey cabbage with a bit of thin, transparent gravy poured over. The best pudding of the week was a small scoop of vanilla ice cream, which was plonked into the bowls far too early, and by the time we got it, had completely melted and become warm, sweet liquid with a froth on top. Breakfasts from Mondays to Saturdays were lumpy mealie meal porridge, bread, and bananas. Perfect food for adolescent girls, most of whom were already trying to stick to a slimming diet. Suppers were a range of watery macaroni cheese with chunks of stewed tomato in it, hard-boiled eggs in an insipid cheese sauce, Welsh rarebit, a slice of brown bread under that same sauce, or my favourite, steamed hake in a parsley sauce. We always had an apple for afters, no puddings. All the other girls always seemed to be hungry and, as a result, talked incessantly about food. They said their portions were too small, but I felt the opposite and always pushed mine around my plate until the handbell to signal the end of the meal was rung by the mistress on duty, and the dining hall full of girls, 216 girls, rang with the sound of chairs being scraped back as we all stood up for grace. With all the talking we had to do and the short time we were allocated our meals, the other girls had to wolf down their food before those sinisterly perceived black hands whisked their plates away. Towards the end of term, I became ill again. Nothing other than a very bad head cold. But I felt awful and took myself down to the San, hoping for a lie down in the day sick room. It was a lovely big room with one side of French windows, which allowed the room to fill with sunlight, which warmed the half-dozen or so beds in there. The bedspreads were a cheerful yellow, the pillows soft and inviting, and there was usually company in the way of a girl or two in there who is suffering from bad period cramps or a migraine. She gave me a huge dose of her very old cold mixture. I'd say odd cold mixture. Some vile concoction based on eucalyptus, which I'm sure was for external use only, or for veterinary purposes, but which she watched sharply while I worried it down, gagging and spluttering, as my eyes watered from the fumes it gave off. She led me to a single-bed ward which looked onto the brick wall of Francis Bain House. "I don't want you giving your cold to any of the other girls here," Sister told me, and left me there to climb shivering into the hard hospital bed. Later on, bored out of my mind, I asked her if I could have a book to read from the day room, and she grudgingly fetched one for me, throwing it onto the end of my bed with a snort of disgust while I snuffled my thanks. I talk about the sickbay food. There wasn't really any food because the San policy was to starve the girls no matter what ailed them. So, even with a head cold, I got watery, unsalted Bovril soup with the inevitable dry, cardboard-like Marie biscuits. If you dunked your biscuit into the weak black tea or Bovril, It turned so sloppy that the wet piece fell instantly back into the drink, leaving me to try and fish the tiny soggy bits out with the plastic teaspoon provided. It was a very high price to pay to lie in bed while the rising bell went, and to stay snug and warm while the girls clattered to class and chapel. The rewards were free time to read books, but the downside was Sister and her unforgiving suspicion that I was putting on my illness, as well as the distant way the other girls treated me once I got out. That's all for this time. I hope you enjoyed it. And I want to thank John Moslane, my producer, for doing such a magnificent job and putting aside his Friday afternoons for us to do this. And also Sean van Vuren, my IT specialist, who actually manages my YouTube site and puts the videos up for me and does a sterling job that way. If you'd like to see more photographs and get more information about my other works, please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com. I hope you enjoyed listening to this, and I look forward to telling you more about my dismal life at boarding school in the next one. Take care. Goodbye.